reconcile this and get it out of the road and move on with what you people do best, and that's breeding good racehorses. I'd like to call on the CEO of the Thoroughbred Breeders, Tom, to say a few words.
Thanks. Firstly, again, just thank you everyone for turning up. We had a great turnout yesterday. I think there was 70 people yesterday, which, considering I think there's only 70 vendors at this sale, is a tremendous show, and also I think an indication as to how serious people treat this issue. At the risk of repeating what I went through yesterday, I'll just give a brief sort of summary from a TBA point of view. I've been in this job for 18 months, and essentially this issue has been on the table the whole of that time. It started off as a Racing Victoria proposal, a reform document, and then slowly lots of the other reforms dropped out of this working paper, and then we were left. We had a number of meetings, firstly with, I think exactly a year ago I met with the Racing Australia board, and further meetings with John and the TBA board, and then more recently we've had a working, I guess a working group with a woman called Frances Nelson QC, who's the Deputy Chair of Racing Australia, and also Des Gleeson, who's obviously probably well known to everyone as a steward. I think from the outset it's worth saying that the TBA, I think, have always tried to come at this and be reasonable and be open. Where there's a good suggestion, to accept that. So a good example would be one of the proposals was around declaration of ownership of who owns what horse, and then making that available. Because at the moment, the stud book only collects the contact breeder. So we immediately said, we'll support this. I think we had a TBA discussion on the phone hookup, and everyone said, look, that's a good idea. We can, you know, not only can we live with that, it will improve our industry, and therefore we should support it. So we went straight back to Racing Australia and said, look, we can do that. We actually sent them a working paper saying, we believe it's best done through the stud book. I mean, after all, it is the stud book that collects contact breeders, so it's not a big change to then take the beneficial owners. Unfortunately, at our last brief meeting with Frances Nelson, essentially we were presented, I don't know if everyone's got this letter that was sent out, I think there's quite a few of them on the table, and you'll see there the new condition that will be added to the stud book, whereby you tick a box which says that as a condition of my entry of my mare's return being accepted into the stud book, I come under the rules of racing. For many reasons, the TBA board, this was the one rule we pushed back against, because essentially it gives Racing Australia, the racing authorities, the power to bring in any rule specifically about breeding. So it's a very fundamental change that they essentially have everyone under the rules of racing from that point. Of course, breeders aren't represented formally at Racing Australia. Some breeders obviously are on the board of Racing Australia, but there's no one there specifically representing the interests of breeders. In terms of history, racing authorities have always had the power essentially to regulate those people, jockeys, trainers, people involved in the actual race day mechanism, putting the races on, ensuring the integrity so that when people bet, which is obviously essential, that they have control and can regulate those people. Breeding, and this is not just, I think, how the TBA views it, I think it's, in almost every other jurisdiction around the world, it's seen as separate to the racing industry, a primary industry. For example, in Ireland, there's the agriculture minister who oversees the breeding industry. It's not breeding is not an insignificant industry. I think last year there were more than $420 million spent on horses at auction alone. Obviously much more once you consider private sales. In New South Wales, a government study found that there are 5,000 people working directly on farms in the breeding industry. Across Australia, it's much more than 10, we believe. we have a big industry to essentially allow the racing industry, with no formal input, with no proper representation, with no mechanism for when there's a bad rule brought in that's damaging to our industry, to have that overturned. The TBA, certainly the view of the board, was that this should be resisted. And look, I'm grateful everyone's here today, including Racing Australia, so that everyone has the opportunity to understand the issue a bit more. Thanks.
I'd like to ask Peter McGoran, CEO of Racing Australia. Peter, you say a few words?
I'll say a few words first, if I may.
Thank you. There's a misconception in the room here about the role of Racing Australia, and I think if we get down to the crux of it, it might help you understand some of the things that we're putting forward. First of all, Racing Australia is a conglomerate of the PRAs of every state, that is the principal racing authorities. These principal racing authorities are established by the government under statute, right? And you can, in each state, there are different mechanisms for becoming a director of those state PRAs. And so one of you, or two of you, or 10 of you can apply when the opportunity arises, like I did, to go onto the board. Interestingly, there's been, for years now, there's been a breeder at the head of Racing New South Wales, or someone that does breed. There's no distinction as to whether it's a breeder, an owner, whatever it might be, a farrier that gets up there. The fact is there are certain qualifications, and once you get on that board, your responsibility is to the racing industry as a whole. I take off my breeding hat on, and I become a representative of the racing industry in New South Wales as a whole, and that's the role I need to play. That doesn't mean I forget about the things that make breeding work, etc. No, that's useful, of course, but that's not the way I'm to undertake my duties. But any of you can apply to go onto this board, like I have. My term will run out shortly, and someone else will come on as Chairman of Racing New South Wales. Interestingly, the Vice Chairman is also a breeder, because basically owners become breeders and breeders become owners, and so 9 times out of 10 people that are interested in becoming administrators are involved in racing in one way or another. They're not all involved in racing, there are some independents that come on from time to time, but mostly they're people that have an interest one way or another in racing. Now, Racing Australia is the way in which the PRAs, that is the state bodies, get together to make rules that will apply nationally. Racing Australia also owns Riser and the stud book now. The stud book for years was owned by the two race clubs, the VRC and the ATC, when they were the regulatory bodies, the principal authorities. But they're no longer the principal authorities. Under government statute, some of those duties now go to the PRAs, such as Racing Australia. That's the reason I brought Peter here, because I think, and Ray, because I think that you people are worried about the impact of this rule. Once the rule is made, Racing Australia is out of it. We don't actually execute anything. We make the rules when all the chairmen of the PRAs are together as directors of Racing Australia. The only thing we really do on a day-to-day basis is run the stud book and run Riser. Other than that, all of the other functions are performed at state level. They've got something you worried about a steward walking onto your place because somebody's told him something about that you're doing. That won't be Racing Australia. It has nothing to do with Racing Australia. The rule is made, it's then executed by the state PRA. So Peter's here to explain how and why you shouldn't be concerned about this rule unless you're doing something wrong. Now, I'm aware, there is no end game here. I'm aware of the rule. I support the rule. I'm a very big breeder. I breed 250 yearlings a year. And I'm not concerned about it. And the reason is that in the modern society, there are much bigger expectations on us now because we're a big industry, because we're a relatively big industry. industry. We're not really that big an industry, but we're a relatively big industry. The government expects a lot from us, as does society, in matters of animal welfare, and for example, and in matters of integrity. And government gets involved because in this whole industry, from go to woe, because if something happens in breeding, believe me, they won't be coming to you, they'll be coming to us. They only know us, they recognise us as the governing body. And the reason they want to have their finger in the pie is because of wagering. When there's money involved in gambling, governments become involved. And so, whether we like it or not, we're regulated and we need to deal with the government. Now, you like to take the view that breeding is separate from racing. That's not the way government or the public see it. We like to see it that way in here perhaps, but it's not the way it's looked at by others that we need to deal with on a continuing basis. Now, the involvement we have with government is really important, that it be at a very high scale, and you can see, because of our credibility with government, we've been able to achieve outstanding outcomes for racing, which of course dribble down to breeding, because it's interwoven. Prize money goes up, people want to breed more, new buyers come into the market, etc. And so it goes on. We are interwoven, and anything that happens in breeding will definitely affect racing and the other way around. Now, we at Racing New South Wales have the job of ensuring the highest levels of integrity are in place to protect the public and to ensure that we maintain a very level relationship with the state government. These are all state government issues, by the way. I'm not talking federal government here. So, what I'm trying to say to you is this. We are regulated, we're heavily regulated, because we're involved in wagering as an industry. Without wagering, you haven't got a breeding industry. Because the majority of our income, and therefore prize money, come from wagering. So necessarily, we're regulated. And to say, I think, that racing and breeding are separate industries is a facile argument. You know, it's a useful argument to put in a case like this when you don't want new regulations. But these new regulations are not going to be the draconian things that you expect. There's no intention for them to be such. They're simply to ensure that we have the respect of the government, the public, in as far as integrity is concerned, and now this new issue of animal welfare. I know that you've agreed to nominate the ownership, etc., and to allow traceability of horses from 30 days after birth. That's critically important for us to know, because we're under we don't tell you that we're under extreme pressure all the time from animal welfare groups and from the government. You've seen what's happened with the dogs. You haven't seen the end effect of what's going to happen with the dogs. It's going to be devastating. We don't want to put ourselves in the same position. Now, I think most of the questions you have to raise can be answered either by Peter or by Ray, because they'll be executing the rule when it comes in. And you need to ask them how they're going to do this, and how are they not going to encroach on your rights, etc. That's what you're worried about.
I think we also need to ask the question about how you're going to introduce the rule in the first place, which is a Racing Australia matter. Not just the practicality of once it's introduced, how it will be determined.
Well, I can answer that. I can answer that. The rule is coming up in draft form to, yeah, you've seen the draft, it's not the final, right? The rule is coming up in draft form to the 8th of April meeting of Racing Australia. If we agree to it in principle on the 8th, which is all the chairmen of the principal racing authorities in each state, if we agree to it in principle, it then goes off to each state council and stewards for their review. And there'll be no doubt some changes. It will then, once then we get it in final draft form, we will revert back to you guys, because you're affected, and say this is what we're proposing to bring in as a rule. And you can have your input at this point. Is that right, Peter? And this is the sort of, if you like, the itinerary of that rule. So we're not in final form. It's going to a meeting on the 8th of April. At that point in time, if we agree in principle to it, it'll go out to the PRAs. The PRAs will then have their work over each state. You, New South Wales breeders, can go and say to your PRA, look, This is our input. We don't think this is right for this and that reason. How are you going to handle this matter, etc.? You'll have your one more say, if you like, when you get the rule to a more final level.
But by that stage, all the chairman of the PRAs. Sorry, by that stage.
Okay. I'll pass on to Peter for the details.
Yeah, this is a genuine question and answer session, and that's why Peter Volandis, Ray Murray, because of the concerns about stewards, are here, and Peter Sweeney, legal counsel at Racing New South Wales and Racing Australia. Look, this goes back 3 years. Jonathan Darcy, Peter Orton will remember the informal discussions we had for a long while. Some 14 recommendations from Racing Victoria, from declaration of vendor bids at one end of the spectrum right through to an education program for buyers at the other end. Where we've landed after almost 3 years and 18 months of constructive discussions with TBA is basically one thing, which is on the mayor return, all ownership details are declared, and every subsequent change of ownership up until registration of a racehorse, which TBA agrees with. However, where we part company is that the rules of racing apply from the mayor return. That's what we're discussing. That's what we're discussing or debating or disagreeing on. Now, the person who's had the most to do with this is Peter Volandis. I'll ask to come forward because Peter has been on the board of ARB. He's seen the acquisition of the stud book. He's seen the reasons of integrity and animal welfare and the basis for the position we're now at, which is ownership is registered from foal return, which is good for you, running commercial businesses, but the rules of racing, and by the way, we've collected what the rules of racing are that apply to breeders, and there's only 6 or 7 as it is. Peter.
Peter. A national, we don't want to hear what New South Wales have got to do.
Peter's on the board of Racing Australia, and he can give the reasons.
Is he on the board as a New South Wales representative or?
No one's, once you get onto the board of these things, you take off your hats, mate. You understand?
Well, I don't want to go down this track. I don't want to go down this track and bore these people with.
You're not boring them. It's the answers to the questions you're asking.
Well, why don't we answer some of the questions?
Well, we ask
some of the questions and then we'll
ask some of the questions and then Peter can say something. We have been down this track for 3 years. We've been consulted very, very minimally, if at all. And we've been to meetings in Adelaide, Melbourne, and have got nowhere. So I think at the moment we need to hear from some of the rank and file of the breeders to say why are we so much against this rule. Would anybody like to start off by saying something?
All of the discussion, everything we've all said from Racing Australia's perspective this morning is operating on the impression that you're entitled to do what you're going to do, that you're entitled to make breeders come under the rules of racing, you're entitled to change what the agreement is when you submit a mayor return. Why do you say that Racing Australia, whether it's a national body or whether it's a conglomerate of PRAs, why do you say you're entitled to regulate breeders at all?
Thanks, Hamish. Firstly, every state in Australia has different legislation in regards to its regulatory body. New South Wales has the Thoroughbred Racing Act, there's an act in Queensland and there's an act in Victoria. In our act in New South Wales, we have to abide by the Australian rules of racing. We believe in New South Wales that we have the power to introduce any rule in regards to racing and breeding. And as you know and as I know, a legal opinion is as good as it's tested. Until it's tested, no one knows if you've got the power or not. We believe we have, you believe we haven't, then it really needs to be tested in the court. But I can tell you that the perception in government is that we do have the power, and if we didn't have the power, they would implement it. Because, like it or not, the greatest challenge racing has at the moment is welfare. The greyhound industry will come, in my view, will probably be terminated in 2 months in New South Wales. And the reason for that is, it's not because of the baiting situation in the Four Corners, is what they've discovered when they've started the inquiries, and that is wastage. There's 10,000 dogs that are destroyed each year. When there's a litter, only 1 or 2 dogs are kept and 6 are destroyed. Now, how do you replicate that to racing? Well, we do have wastage as well. Now, there's very little wastage once they come to a race course. There's about 3 or 4% of horses. All the horses are rehomed. The figure that we don't have, which is a vital statistic, is what happens until they are registered. Because that's where we are really, really exposed to wastage. And there is, I don't know what the wastage is. Nobody does, because nobody's done those figures. Part of this rule, part of this regulation, is to enable us to have an armoury against all these animal liberationists as to what our wastage is. Because I can tell you, I get 100 emails a day from the animal liberationists. They haven't gone away. One of the reasons the New South Wales government wants to keep the greyhounds is because we're the next online for the animal liberationist. If you think we're not, you're kidding yourself. Because we are. The whip issue, the wastage issue, they're not going to let the 2-year-old racing issue, the amount of times a horse races, they're all on the table.
How many pups does a greyhound have in a year?
They have, well, the litter is about 6, but there's also...
How many foals does a mare have in a year?
Well, they have 1, but Tom, with all due respect, there's still wastage. You can kid yourself. Well, it is a valid argument, because I've been to a couple of conferences, and the main element anywhere in the world, like it or not, is welfare. The young people do not like seeing a horse whipped. I was the one that, with Ray Murray, he fought as hard as possible to retain the whip and to ensure that the jockey could use it unlimited times in the last 100 metres, and overruled what Victoria wanted to do. But even though I'm a supporter of the whip, everywhere I go, any young person I speak to, they say, you should ban the whip. You will not be relevant in 10 years unless you address these welfare issues. You can come in here and unless you are willing to change with society, you will perish. The biggest problem I have as an administrator in racing at the moment is keeping racing relevant amongst our competitors. Sport is going to overtake us very, very quickly as the wagering medium. The one thing we have that sport doesn't have is we're very, very fortunate, and take it for granted, that we have people like Ray Murray who scrutinise every element of our sport to make sure integrity is at the highest level. Because that's the advantage we have over every other sport. Because I can tell you, if in-play betting comes in, we won't be sitting around here arguing amongst ourselves, we'll all be gone. Because in England, in-play betting now makes up 60 or 70% of the wagering pool. There's not a jurisdiction in the world, excluding possibly Hong Kong and Japan, that are going well in thoroughbred racing. Unless you change your corporate, let me finish, unless you change your corporate governance model, you're not going to meet the challenges of today's society.
Peter, you've just mentioned every example you just gave was about racing.
No, I didn't.
Well, the only example you just gave that wasn't related to racing, that related to breeding, was wastage. And as far as I'm concerned, every foal, whether dead or alive, must be registered. It always has been. Okay. So I don't understand. You seem to be focusing on issues that we're not concerned as breeders.
Okay, well, let me tell you a couple of examples in the breeding industry. Horses that are malnutritioned, that aren't looked after. There's a situation, I'll give you a situation that's been brought to my attention, and some studs do it and some studs don't do it. But where they have a surrogate mare and they abort the foal in order for the surrogate mare to have the thoroughbred foal, do you think that's going to be... I'm not saying the TBA can't manage its own welfare, but at the end of the day, we are the body, like it or not, that's perceived to be responsible. There's a situation at the moment where there's a horse being malnutritioned in a farm, and the parties all came to racing in New South Wales. Horses, there's probably about, how many were there, Ray? 20? 33 horses. The bodies didn't go to TBA, they came to racing in New South Wales.
Peter, with all due respect, what the previous question was, or the previous comment in relation to what you've been going on about here, in the circle of life, this business is the beginning of the circle of life of horses. This business is about the people in this room who own studs, including John there. He owns a stud. He's also chairman of New South Wales Racing, and he's also, I believe, chairman of the third group, which we're talking about, Australian Racing, right? So he knows what the circle of life's all about. He's been of horses in all his life. It starts with us. It starts with everyone in this room. You've talked about everything that starts after what goes on. Everyone in this room is livelihood of breeding horses and getting the best value for it. Everyone in this room know all about the duty of care because they want to get the best value for their stock. They're not going to mistreat their animals. They're not going to bring them to market. And if you go out here, how they're all impeccable, absolutely impeccable, and a credit to everyone in this room. They are all about welfare. Welfare, you've got the RSPCA there who can get on your back. If we were treating horses some bad because of the animal lovers, and people have to be horse lovers to work in the industry with the amount of money they get paid in that, they have to be. So everyone in the industry, in the breeding industry, as I've seen it, and I've only been in it the last 5 years, are very, very respectful, very, very passionate people, and understand what duty of care is all about. Most studs these days have their own workplace health and safety, and a lot of that includes duty of care because you have to. Under the law, as directors, as John will tell you, you and I and everyone else, we've got to show that we care, and there's systems in place already in relation to that. I repeat, we have the RSPCA there. People who work for people give you up as quick as possible. In this industry they would, because they love their animals. So with all due respects, yes, you talked about greyhounds, which has got nothing to do with us. You talked about waging. There'd be no wages if everyone in this room didn't do what they do, get out of bed, prepare their animals, look after them, make sure they got the best husbandry, make sure they got the best chiropractors, vets, the whole business. If the vets are not doing the right thing, we get rid of them. We get rid of them. So the circle of life starts here with everyone in this room. The circle of life with horses starts here. And that is the concern of everyone in this room, that New South Wales Racing or Australian, the stud book, you're trying to rule them through the registration of the horses. If we didn't breed the blooming horses, you wouldn't have any registration. Sure, it does come back the other way with the money, but you just sit here and everyone think about the circle of life. That's where we've got to get to, the circle of life, where it all starts. It all starts here. We get shot on the table here yesterday, the rules of racing. What are the rules of racing? You're right. Head stewards here, they're the gatekeeper. They are the gatekeepers of those rules. And they can only operate within those rules. If you ask Ray there, he will say to you, I'm only here, there's a rule book, I've got to administer that rule book. Half the people in this room, well not half, including myself, don't even understand what the processes are. They're rules. They're brought by legal people, which are just rules, which are very, very hard to understand for the average person. Nowhere is there a process in place. There is not a process saying, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do that. We have to interpret it. And I think that what everyone in this room is worried about, the interpretation of what is being inflicted upon it. So, we all have conflicts. I've got conflicts. John's got conflicts there in his position. We know how to handle conflicts, I think. I think we know how to handle them. We're business people. You know, it's a very, very hard line here. So can we stick to, I think as the gentleman up there said, can we just stick to the breeding industry and ask questions in relation to the breeding industry, because that's what we're concerned about.
If I can just comment on those statements, don't disagree with anything you say, Kevin, not one iota disagreement. And the thing is, that's why you've got nothing to be concerned about. If you have all these systems in place, if you have all this professionalism, the rules will mean nothing to you, zero. But there's always a rogue element in every industry. Like it or not, there's people that bring you down from other aspects. I'll be the first person in this room to say that the studs do a magnificent job, and I've been to most of them. But the big studs aren't the ones we're concerned about. And you're 100% right. You do have the duty of care and you do a great job. And so these rules will be meaningless to you. If you don't do the wrong thing, if you don't provide illicit substances, if you don't put prohibited substances in your horse, if you look after your horse, enable us to trace where the horse is at all times, this is a frivolous argument.
You said the laws are meaningless to us. We've got to look after them. So why do you need the laws if you think they're meaningless?
Because we have to look after the rogue element, Kevin. There's always, like it or not, there's a rogue element in every industry. And as I say, I've been to most of the big studs. You do a fantastic job, no argument. But there's also the ones that don't. There's also the ones that flaunt the rules or do something wrong. And you're realistically living in fantasy land if you don't think that happens.
No, that's because right. I think we're happy with the laws and the rules as long as they're framed in an equal and manageable level. We're more concerned that they're not being framed in the right format.
Well, Kevin, let me answer that question for you about the rules. 95% of the rules that come forward, probably even more, come from the stewards' conferences. The stewards hold conferences 4 times a year. They make all the recommendations on the rules. Very rarely, unless there's a paper like Racing Victoria, as Tom mentioned earlier, that comes along and that we look at other rules, but the majority of rules comes through the stewards. They go then to the PRA. The PRA then gives it to its consultative body. Last meeting, the Waikiki New South Wales, which has a breeder as a representative, looked at all the rules that were coming forward, approved all the rules to Racing New South Wales. Racing New South Wales then approved it to Racing Australia. There is one of the criticisms I have about our industry is how long it takes to make a rule. It takes up to 12 months to get a rule through because of all these checks and balances all the way through.
Excuse me, it's just the next one. My question's addressed.
Can we please, I think Peter's had a very good, you've had a fair go. Can we have some questions from the floor, please, that show you people where we're at.
Okay, thanks.
And I think, Peter, really, it should be addressed to Peter McGoran, because Peter McGoran is the CEO of Racing Australia. There's plenty of us here, not from New South Wales, so I don't think we need to hear from Peter Landis anymore. I think we need to hear from...
Well, my question, it's okay, my question is for Peter McGoran. I've got the rules of racing here as well. There's 101 pages, and in there's one mention of breeders, Rule 168. Obviously, given that there's only one rule, there's 2 obviously jurisdictions here we're discussing today, racing and breeding. Obviously, we're going to have to come up with 101 pages for breeding, but you want us to fall under the rules of racing. There's hardly a mention of breeders in there.
Yeah, agreed. I've extracted about and given them. I've extracted and given to Tom previously. There's a rule on notifiable diseases. There's a rule on the on firing, death of a horse. So, but you're right. There's very few, and that's why I tried to stress earlier on. There's basically only one area of disagreement, and that is the philosophical argument, if you like. And what Peter's attempted to do is show you what the perception...
It's not a philosophical argument, sorry, it's a practical argument, Peter. Because what these rules would give is the power for stewards to walk onto your farm. These rules would give the stewards power to walk onto your farm, to search your property. It is in the rules of racing that if you fail to obey an instruction from a steward, that in itself is a punishable offence. So it's not a philosophical argument. This is about practicalities of how you run your business. Yeah. So I think it's fair. I think it's fair to qualify that, please.
Fair enough. In which case, we would sit down, we'd work out protocols. Stewards are already visiting stud farms irregularly. So Ray, I don't know if you want to hear from how Ray would handle it.
No, we want to hear from somebody.
I'd just like to ask Peter McGowan a question. Peter, one rule you have brought in for breeders is the banning of steroids. Now, the first sale we had after you banned the steroids, which I think was a Magic Million sale, there was a debacle happened. Can you explain what happened and why, please?
Yes, Racing Queensland stewards sought advice as to whether or not Regulamate was an anabolic steroid. Scientific advice was given, which was incorrect. Before, immediately it was objected to. I commissioned an independent opinion from Queensland University. Before that could be given, it broke in a Melbourne newspaper. So there was a veterinary advice given initially that was incorrect. So it was a stuff up, but it
it happened.
Were breeders consulted before, you know, these rules and the testing was done at the sales? Was there any consultation with breeders at all?
Well, do you object to the anabolic steroid testing at sales?
Not the question.
You agreed to it. You agreed to it. It was an incorrect veterinary advice for which I'm happy to apologise.
The question was, did you consult with breeders before you introduced this rule and the regulations? Have any consultation as breeders when you...
hang on. I'm just trying to think of the sequence of events because it's a couple of years ago. Of course.
I don't think so. I don't think you did.
No, but what's your point, Arthur? You know, anabolic steroid testing's been in for 18 months now.
Peter, already there's a farce here because there's rules for racing where regulators not permitted, and now we've got a rule where breeders are allowed to give regulated. You've thrown it out, your argument's out the window.
Plus, a lot of us are already under the rules of racing. Just like us in this room are already under the rules of racings if we're owners. If we own horses in our own right, we're already under that. We're already working under the auspices of that. We're only talking about the breeding industry here. As I said, the first thing in the circle of the life of a racehorse.
Can I just jump in?
We're already covered there.
Can I just jump in on the...
Separate lot of rules for breeding. It's this.
Can I just jump in on the whole regumate?
Just 1 minute, Mick. Mick Malone is running one of the leading studs in New South Wales, Kitchener Hills, and when this broke at the Magic Million sales, the anxiety and the bad publicity that Mick got wasn't deserved by anybody, let alone somebody that wasn't guilty.
No, that's right. And the age-old saying that
like you to say something.
if you've done nothing wrong, you should have nothing to worry about, which is what we hear all the time. And I felt that I'd done nothing wrong. I attended a meeting, which a lot of the guys here today attended at the Magic Millions a day or so before the sale that Vin chaired, and was suggested that if you haven't given your horse an anabolic steroid, you've got nothing to worry about. I walked out of that meeting. I was quite happy with the fact I've never given an anabolic steroid to a yearling, and certainly hadn't at that sale. 10 days after the sale, just to fill everyone in what happened, I got a call to say that one of our yearlings had tested positive to an anabolic steroid, which blew my socks off. And they went on to say the substance was regumate, Melchunogest. So I was floundered to think that that was an anabolic steroid at the first point, but what really hit home hard was I knew at that point there that it probably would go public. And, you know, Kitchener Hills is a small family-run business that have put their heart and soul into it. They've built a brand over 20 years that means the world to us. And within a heartbeat, that brand was going to be thrown in the fire. And make no, it was going. We're in deep. And it's without doubt, if I hadn't got the support of the Thoroughbred Breeders Association, we're in deep. There was no getting out of it. So we're forever grateful of what you guys did to pull us back and clean it up, because I don't recall getting too many calls from Racing New South Wales about it. All I recall is that my one and only run-in I've had with a racing rule was that one that was pretty horrendous.
Chairman?
Yes, right.
I've just got a few questions. Basically, for Peter to start with. Peter, the greyhounds you said in New South Wales... Sorry, Peter. The greyhounds in New South Wales will be over in 2 months. What happens to the welfare of all the dogs there? What's happening there? Where will all these dogs go and how will they find homes? Really?
Look, I'm not privy to the inquiry because we haven't made a submission. All I can tell you is the intelligence we're getting through government circles is what the likely outcome is going to be. Okay. And let me just say this to you, the outcome has a double whammy for us. One, we're the next on the cards for the welfare issue, but two, the loss of revenue that we're going to suffer from no greyhound racing. The greyhound racing make up 20% of the wagering turnover. So if they go, we need to find additional revenue from somewhere else. That's another challenge we have. And you know, we've been very fortunate in the last few years to get race fields and parity, which has doubled the revenue to keep our prize money to where it is. If we didn't have all those, we wouldn't be arguing in here because half of us wouldn't be here. You know, and I agree with Kevin, it starts at the beginning, but without racing, you don't have breeding. If you don't have the success of the racing part of the industry, there is no industry. Yeah. And let me just tell you, if I can just answer one thing about the problems as I see in the industry, is the greatest problem in this industry, in my view, is it's divisive, it's fragmented, and fights amongst itself. And lets the challengers out there have a free kick at us. And everyone thinks that we're held in this high esteem within government. We aren't. We're not the juggernaut we think we are in government. I can tell you, we've been fighting government for 10 years. We are seen as a disorganised rabble. That's what we're seen as. Okay. I have no problem coming to these meetings and addressing you and having our issues on the table. But we should keep them in-house. We should keep them here, in this room, and not out in the marketplace like it's been. I think because all you're doing is damaging yourselves. You know, that's what you're doing. So I'm just pleading to everybody in this room, have your say. I apologise to you what happened to you at the sales, but there's also a gentleman here that was maligned about owning the stud book. I think that was a pretty horrible thing too. Mr Massara doesn't own the stud book. Let me tell you, when I started at Racing New South Wales, I was concerned about copyright and how we're going to ensure that people don't abuse our wagering with the great Philip Esplin, and I wish he was here. And that's the fight that we had, and that's where RISA came from. And in order to meet the Trade Practices Act, and in order to meet the taxation, now let me just finish. I think it's fair because somebody, you're going to know this because somebody at the meeting the other day said that John Massara owns the stud book. He doesn't own the stud book. Before John Massara held the shares, I held the shares. Whoever the representative of the state statutory authority is, holds the shares. And the stud book isn't the major asset of Racing Australia. What the major asset of Racing Australia is the database, the race field. That's the
Peter, I just asked one question. I
appreciate the question, but I think that there's got to be a balance as well in the argument. Yeah. So and that's why they don't want me to speak, Peter, because there's a lot of misinformation out there.
Excuse me, we want to give everybody a chance, Peter. You've taken up 90% of the argument this morning.
Peter McGorran, Peter, I'd just like an answer to this. Can stewards come onto your property, and what power do they have? Do they have more power than the police? That's a major concern for a lot of breeders. Now,
he doesn't run the stewards. He doesn't run the PRA. Runs the stewards.
As I said earlier in the piece to Kevin, and that is the stewards come onto your race course, come onto the farm for specific purposes, the welfare of the horse, and if you're using prohibited substances. That's the only reasons they're going to come onto that farm.
Peter, I just have one question. Yeah. Can they, and do they have more power than the police?
No, they don't.
In other words, if they come onto your farm, they have a search warrant, is that right?
No, they don't have a search warrant. But
well, they have more power than the police. I'm sorry, they do.
No, but they're
yes or no?
It really depends on the... no, because there is not a yes or no answer. It depends on the circumstances of each individual case. It does.
I just asked one question, Peter. Do they have more authority and power than the police? Because the police cannot come onto your property without a search warrant, and a search warrant for good reason.
Yeah, but this is a different set of circumstances.
No, it's not.
It is because this is an industry. It's not under. This is under the Thoroughbred Racing Act, not under the Crimes Act or under the Cheating and Gambling Act. This is under the Thoroughbred Racing Act. It's complete different legislation that governs it.
Well, there's lawyers in the room, Hamish and Pete Sweeney, but my understanding is if the police have reasonable grounds to believe that an offence is being created, they can enter a property without a search warrant.
If they get a search warrant, Peter?
No, they can come onto grounds.
No, they can't.
Yet, Hamish, Pete, if they have a reasonable suspicion of an offence being created, of course they can enter a property. What, somebody's being... there's a burglar on Hamish.
The only thing I'll say, Peter, is that it wouldn't be drafted in the way the Australian Rules of Racing drafted, allowing a steward to enter your property in the way that it is. And that you read that rule, I can't remember what number it is, but it's so bland and so basic that the stewards can enter any property. It's what it says.
But of course, we're happy to sit down and develop protocol.
It's licensing every breeder.
From the rank and file breeders, I mean, we're talking about a higher level at the moment. From the rank and file breeders, the mums and dads and the larger studs, one of the big concerns we've got about the rules that are being brought in are that everyday veterinary procedures that are carried out on stud farms, such as flushing of mares, such as periostral strips, bridging, some of these are going to be seen as a welfare issue and something they won't be able to be performed, and therefore the value of the horses is going to be less in future. Can either Ray or Peter address that?
John? Well, who says they're animal welfare?
I don't see the relevance of that sort of detail to this question. We are really, the animal welfare we're talking about is of the type that Peter's described before to you. And the traceability we need is for that reason. I don't see it coming into that level of animal care that we perform on our horses, frankly. Yeah.
If you go to strip a foal that's got legs like a half open pocket knife, the foal's going to be put down. So that is welfare, isn't it?
Yep.
It is welfare. That's horses that are going to be destroyed because they need a very, very minor operation.
Exactly, and we have to stand our ground and defend that as we defend 2-year-old racing and employment of the whip. The point is, but you've got to have the standing and the authority to be able to rebut these arguments. We don't cave into the animal welfare groups. We look at community opinion, government. We would defend those practices as being best animal welfare practices. So, Jonathan, no, that's not what we're talking about.
That's good. That is some of the concern.
Exactly. Senator, I hear from John North, who runs a family-run start, who's had a rather bad experience with this. John, please.
Oh, look, we had an incident about 18 months ago where I had to dismiss an employee for being basically an alcoholic and inappropriate behaviour towards female members of the staff and that sort of thing. And he turned up to work about 3 o'clock in the afternoon after having been at the pub in town for 3 hours, but I had to dismiss him on the spot. His immediate response was, well, if you don't give me $30,000 severance pay straight away, I'm going to Racing New South Wales and I'm going to tell them that you've been injecting your weedlings with anabolic steroids. And I said, well, that's not true, you know it's not true. And he said, yes, it is, I've been doing it. So I said, okay, well, you go your hardest, you ring Racing New South Wales, but you're not getting any money from me. So he then rang Racing, well, I then rang Racing New South Wales and told them of the threat. And and the steward I spoke to, Chris, somebody or other, yes, said that this was a police matter. It had nothing to do with Racing New South Wales because the Racing New South Wales doesn't have any authority over the stud farms. Within 24 hours, I had a call back from Chris saying, oh yes, we do have authority over you. We have authority over every racehorse, every thoroughbred that is born. It doesn't matter whether it's a racehorse or a foal or what it is. So we're going to come out to your place and we're going to have a look around. We're going to check your, we're going to take blood samples from your weanlings. We brand about 250 foals in that particular year. We're going to take blood samples and we're going to sample the ones that this Clive says that he's injected. And within 24 hours, Nathan Hayward, the racecourse detective, and Chris and a local vet who was a bit offended for because we'd already moved this vet on and she'd been, talked to, well, we were a bit worried that she was going to badmouth us around the district, but anyway, that's another issue. So they took the samples from the horses in the barn. We had some 50-odd weanlings in the barn at the time. They didn't sample 50, but they took the ones that this fellow said that he'd injected, plus a few more. The stewards then asked us for a list of all the spellers on the farm and the trainers that trained these horses, which we gave happily because we knew we hadn't given them any steroids. And they then went around and took a sample of blood samples from all not all the spellers, but quite a significant number of them. And we then waited and waited, and probably about 3 weeks later, Mr. Murray, he'll be able to confirm it, that I got an email from Mr. Murray thanking me very much for our cooperation and saying there was no anabolic steroids at all in any of our weanlings or any of the spellers. Subsequent to that, the Magic Millions was just around the corner the following January. We went to the Magic Millions, and again our yearlings were all tested, not all of them, but a significant sample of them with the sales, all clean, and again at Easter the following year. Bincox very kindly, one of the problems we had was the security, because if this bloke had got back and injected our horses and they'd been checked again, or he got to them at the sales and they'd been injected again, we could have been rubbed out. I'm not quite sure what the action would have been. Mr. Murray, he would be able to tell us what would have happened to us. But thankfully, on 3 occasions, we were completely clean and exonerated. Now, my concern is that everybody in this room is probably open to that kind of possibility that could happen to them, and what's going to be the repercussions on breeders that are trying to do the right thing. I've been 5 times president of a good country racetrack. I've been on the Central Districts Racing Committee for a long term, and I sponsor a lot of race clubs and that sort of thing. And when you feel that violated, that they will take the word of a person that they knew had been warned off every racetrack in Queensland, and a proven record of doping horses in racing stables, and had been rubbed out for that, and now a common criminal who's in jail, over someone like myself who's had an impeccable record in racing and gives so much back to it, I feel. I just felt so violated, and I just think that it can happen to anybody in this room, and I think it's time the racing authorities started looking after the people that are contributing to the industry, and not trying to knock people down and destroy their livelihoods.
John, just a question. At the sales, were your horses randomly tested?
Yes, both sales. But we had not only that, we had
more tested than most members.
Well, I would believe. I'm not sure, but I felt that was the case, and Bincox very kindly put extra security on at the sales and made sure that nobody could get to our horses at the sales, and I just felt that was so unnecessary. But I didn't have any answers, and I didn't know who to go to or who to turn to for any help other than just let everybody know our side of the story. Now everyone knows. Thanks.
Thanks, John.
I have a question for Peter McGoran. Peter, you talk about the need for integrity. We've seen many examples, scandals within the racing industry. We've got cobalt scandals, we've got jockeys betting on racing, you've got trainers doing dodgy deals selling horses. Can you please name one integrity scandal that's involved the breeding industry?
No, I can't name one integrity scandal. I'm sure others might be able to, but they're rare and infrequent, and we're being proactive. We didn't have to start down this road and incur the anger and the estrangement we seem to have now, but we're looking to the future, and that's essentially what Peter was saying. A lot of it is perception, Chris. And governments are astounded that we don't have control over these thousands of unregistered thoroughbreds. You talk a circle of life. Unfortunately, the government expects us to be responsible from birth. So no, this is not a slur or a condemnation of the breeding industry. It is instead a lot of its perception and safeguarding. In regard to those scandals, you're right. How do you think we feel about these wrongdoers in our industry? But there's 2,500 trainers, there's 900 jockeys, there's 96,000 owners. We're a mass
participation industry, which is to everybody's interest. So of course we're going to have a few bad eggs.
Yeah, Peter, that's exactly my point. You bring up the word perception. Why would the breeding industry want to be involved with the racing industry with your perception? Can you name an example with welfare that involves purely the thoroughbred breeding industry?
Two things. We are back to the philosophical question. I think where you say breeding is a separate industry, we say it's one industry. It's integrated. We're each dependent on each other. Our interests and goals are exactly the same. The second question, welfare. But purely, we're dealing with the thoroughbred industry here.
Name one example of an incident.
Oh yes. Well, how would I know? I'm a racing administrator. I haven't previously had. I haven't previously. No, that's not a gotcha moment. I haven't previously had the responsibility of inquiring into the standards of animal welfare of breeding. The point is that there's going to be some bad eggs in your industry, just as there is in our industry. And we want to look to the future, we want to work together, and we want to be able to rebut and defend our industry against what we believe are inevitably shifting community and government standards.
We certainly believe, as the breeding industry, as you said, you're a racing minister, you have no idea about the breeding industry. We're going to be more able and capable of dealing with the bad eggs within our own industry.
Just a point of clarification, I didn't say I had no idea about the breeding industry, I said I wouldn't know. Thanks.
I think this comes down to, we are separate industries. You talk about one industry, yes, we're intertwined, but we're very separate. We're primary producers. You guys are in the racing side of it. You talk, John is a representative of racing industry. He's appointed by the Statute of Racing. He deals with the racing minister. We're basically the guys on the land, on the farms. I think it'd be like in the coal industry, the coal miners or the mining industry being run by the power industry, by the guys in the power mills. They're two separate industries. The beef cattle producers, Peter, they're not run by the butchers. Ultimately, we're primary production, and we do breed and supply horses to racing. Not all of our horses race in Australia. Quite a number of them race overseas. Some of them, unfortunately, never see the track. But you have that information already, and you have that information about wastage. You can control all that stuff through the stud book. You know exactly what happens to every horse. These buzzwords, welfare and integrity, they're buzzwords. You go to Canberra and you talk about welfare and integrity. We go to Canberra and we talk to the same guys on the same day. You were there, John?
It's got nothing to do with Canberra. It's a state issue.
Well, when we're in Canberra, it's a national issue. We're talking as primary producers in Australia, as farmers. We're talking to Barnaby Joyce and we're talking to all those guys on national issues about breeding. And you're talking about racing. We are very separate industries, and there's a lot of separate issues. So for you to come along and say that as the racing authority, we should be controlling the breeding industry because we know best, I just don't think that washes with anyone in this room.
I think you're taking it, if I can just answer Anthony's question, I think you're taking it to extreme. No one's trying to regulate the breeding industry. The rules that have been introduced are very hardly trying, but it's hardly trying to regulate the industry. As that gentleman just mentioned before, he did nothing wrong, had nothing to be concerned about, he was proven innocent. In my 12 years at Racing New South Wales, I think someone raised the question if someone can nobble a horse while there's been one instance in 12 years that I'm aware of, and that person was exonerated. So I think you need to know the facts. That's what we're trying to provide you. We're not, trying to force something down anyone's throat. We're just trying to provide you the facts as they exist.
The second part of my question is, our industry has done a great job looking after itself, and we've got a clean nose. If we hand over the power of our industry and become licensed under the rules of racing, what's there to stop a very successful racing administrator and a breeder, a guy like Bruce McHugh, taking a job on at Racing New South Wales, being appointed to Racing Australia, controlling the stud book, license us under the rules of racing, and now we have AI. We know the battle we had to fight there with Bruce, and that's a perfect example of why we don't hand over control.
Well, there's something I did do back in 2004 that takes care of that, in my view, and that is that unless New South Wales and Victoria agree, they both have a veto right on any rule. It would be a very rare instance where there would be these sort of extremists on both New South Wales and Victoria. I've had 7 chairmen at Racing New South Wales, 7. Every single one of them was a breeder. Tony Hartnell was a breeder, Gary Pemberton was a breeder, Alan Bell was a breeder, Alan Brown was a breeder, John Massara is a breeder. There's nothing in this room stopping any person from applying to be on a statutory authority. There's nothing stopping you from getting on the board of Racing in New South Wales. You can make application like everybody else to get on that board. It's a complete independent process. If you want democracy, that's how you regulate your own industry, is you get on the board. The worst thing that can happen to you, and I'm just giving you a warning, is what's happened in Queensland, where you have a government that doesn't care. And they put an administrator in there, and now they're going to reduce all prize monies, they're reducing jockeys' riding fees. Is that what you want? Do you want the government to take over the regulation because we can't regulate ourselves? Because that's unfortunately, when you're seen in government, and I go to government pretty well weekly, that's how we're seen. So that's how they're going to say, one day there's going to be somebody going to say, stuff this, just put in an independent commission, let the bureaucrats run racing, and Queensland will be the model that you can all rely on, because that's what will happen.
Peter, can I answer that, please? That's totally erroneous, because it was put in place, and put in place because of a conflict between the Labor Party, which is dead set against racing in Queensland, and that is the reason. No other reason whatsoever was that the Labor Party had been kicked out of the racing administration when the Bob Bentley era ended, and it was payback time. Please, in 2 or 3 months' time, there is not a $28 million deficit in Racing Queensland. They've cut the races by about $4,000. In 2 months' time, I'll have a bet with Peter V'landys that they're back up to the same amount of prize money. And I'll also have a bet, and I'm not a betting man, but I'll also have a bet that in 2 months' time you've still got greyhounds racing in New South Wales. Because if you want to know something about the wagering in Queensland since the Four Corners scandal, the wagering on greyhounds has gone up 18%. So everybody said they wouldn't chase and they wouldn't do this and they wouldn't bet on them. It's gone up 18%. So governments aren't going to do away with something that is bringing them in money, I can assure you. So I'll have a bet with you, Peter, that greyhounds are still racing in New South Wales at the end of June.
To Peter McGoran.
Well, no, I'll take the bet on, because I don't think you understand the way that the revenue is generated by each racing industry. And that is, the Queensland racing industry at the moment guarantees the cost of the product of other states. The reason that there's a deficit is because Racing Victoria has changed its funding, it's changed its charging model for race fields. They've stung not the corporate bookmakers, they've stung the totalisators, the tabs. So the tab in Queensland is now paying significantly more money to Racing Victoria, and the Queensland racing industry is paying it back to tax. That's why there's a deficit.
These people don't want to listen. Just 1 minute, please. Thanks, John.
Most people in this room simply oppose more bureaucrats overseeing our industry. We are farmers. That's what we are. It's nothing to do with wagering. We all respect the role you guys have in wagering. You're put there to look after it, and I think you personally do a bloody good job. And I'm fairly close to being involved in it, as you know. But they don't want you in the breeding industry. They just simply don't want you. We are a rural industry. We are reasonably free of bureaucracy. We are reasonably free of any other mess you guys get yourself in on a daily basis. We just don't want to be in it. You know, we don't have a lot of unionism in our industry. We don't have a lot of bureaucracy in the industry we're in. I am in property. Charlie, you want to get involved with bureaucracy? Come and be a property developer. You've never seen them fall out of trees every morning like you do in my industry. I'm also in mining. God almighty. You know, no wonder a man spends half his life in bloody hospital getting over the day's work with these bastards hanging around. I am a breeder. My wife will tell you I'm past it, but I'm a breeder. I want to be a breeder, okay? And I love this industry. And I don't want to be kowtowed and looked over by somebody that's, okay, you have your role, I said that, but this is not your role. This is taking your role too far. That's correct.
Thanks, John. John Kelly.
And Peter McGoran, could you tell me, if we get someone as chairman of Racing Australia who we would like to remove as a breeding industry, when we come under the rules of racing, 101 pages of them, which mention breeding once, and someone makes a silly rule, the chairman of Racing Australia instigates it, how do we remove that person?
Of course, you go through your state principal racing authority. Racing Australia is only, as John was stressing at the outset, a conglomerate of each of the principal racing authorities.
So Peter, what we have to do is, everyone in this room has to go to their state racing minister and get him to instruct their representative on Racing Australia to remove the chairman. Are you kidding? Do you think that that's possible for us to do that?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, the question is that we have no control over the person who's governing our industry.
The question is, if you get John, Bruce McHugh as chairman, I know you've said the other people, but you know now you have a QC, a lady who doesn't understand breeding. You have a Queensland representative who doesn't understand breeding. He was supposed to persuade you. I was a chairman, I'm sure.
The Racing Australia didn't exist.
I just, you can get the numbers if you have some chairman who is powerful but loses his marbles, like you would think Bruce McHugh had done. That's one of the major concerns. The other concern is when stewards can walk onto your property, we have no control. We can't stop them. More power than the police. They're the two concerns.
Peter, can I ask one very simple question? Why we're not canvassing as an Australian body to have a federal minister for racing, which would eliminate all of this? We would have a kingpin that sits over the top of all state jurisdictions, and everyone falls into line. Why are we not canvassing that, or are we too state divided in terms of our power plays?
The wagering is state-based and they derive a revenue.
Yeah, no, but I'm not talking about that. As an industry, you're hearing pretty loud and clearly that we don't really participate in the wagering side of it. We're the primary producers within the industry. So we perhaps deserve a federal minister.
Just back to John Kelly's point, which was supplemented by, the founding fathers, you know, every sector of the economy has the same issue of state-based or federation. Right. One of the big issues for TBA for a very long time has been getting a seat at the table. You've never been able to seriously influence racing with 83% of you being owners and exerting your influence and rightful entitlements in racing. That's your biggest problem. This would make you an equal party to the other stakeholders, whether it be the...
You've got to be kidding me. I've been involved in this on Aushorse for the last 18 months, and if you think that you're going to stand up there and tell me that we've been consulted with this rule, we have been dictated to, walked over the top of, and that's why everyone is in this room today, because you blokes think you don't even listen. We've had the meetings. You just tell us what's going to happen, and we're not prepared to accept
Johnny, you're completely wrong here, mate. No, he's not right. Well, it's 70 of you, so you can out-talk us if you like. You're not right, John. You're not. First of all, there are the state bodies, as Peter explained to you. New South Wales and Victoria have got the right of veto, right? The chairman, me, can't do anything. I go there, I've got 1 out of 7 votes. I can't do anything. I've got a percentage. I've got New South Wales has got 35%, Victoria's got 35%, the smaller states have got smaller numbers. But it's not run the way you think it's run. It's run in a very cooperative way, but if something stupid occurs, you've got the biggest 2 states that can veto the decisions. So you've got a level of control there that way, away from stupid decisions that somehow could get through the filter. And there's a big filter, it takes a long time. Secondly, we're here and we haven't yet put the rule in place because we have been talking to you and we know how concerned you are. That's why we're here, and that's why over 18 months The rule hasn't been brought in. It could have been brought in day one if we wanted it to be brought in. So I think you're a bit unfair when you say what you're saying.
John, I wish I could, like, you and I have always had a good relationship, and I've told you frankly from the beginning with this rule that I don't agree with it. And I wish that you take away from this meeting today that the breeders don't want this. And if you think you're consulting, I would suggest that you speak to the people who you think are doing the consulting, because I'll take this microphone around this room and ask every TBA board member and every Aushorse board member and ask them and if they've been heard. And I'll do it now if you like.
Johnny, you don't want this rule. The vets didn't want to be licensed. They got licensed after 2.5 years of acrimonious discussion. They went to the government, they went everywhere in the country. Now ask the vets whether they think it's an issue for them. Go ahead, go and ask them, all of them, any of them. Well, I talk to them every day and I told them, hang on, well, you might, I know you've taken that view from the start, right? Okay, I understand your position, but I've spoken to all the REC. No, there are always exceptions in every rule. There are people here that take a different view. No, we don't. No, the trainers don't want certain rules. We're fighting with the Trainers Association as well. The owners don't want certain rules. Everybody, we've got the jockeys don't want a lot of rules. So they're all, but we're all part of the one industry, we're all interdependent. We're all interdependent. And if you don't accept that, then you've got a problem on your hands, in my opinion, because you don't realise just how independent you are. We have the product we produce, I'm with you, the product we produce cannot be sold unless this man and his team do a proper job up there. And the rest of the states do the same. Right? So hang on, so this is the independence we have, one with the other. We, on the other hand, have to ensure that nothing can come out of the breeding industry that can affect that as well. We're not here to strangle anybody. 99 times out of 100, you won't see our stewards. You'll see our stewards if there's a case comes up that is serious, that needs attention. Only a minor number of rules apply to you. Most of those rules of racing apply to racehorses in training. So you look at that book and you think, oh my God, the fact is they don't apply to you. Now, Tom will say to you, new rules might come in. But this is where, we've got to be sensible. You have a voice. You do have a voice. We're listening to you. We have been listening to you for 18 months.
So, John, listening to everything that's been said here, and obviously the breeders have listened, they have coalesced, they've put in some very, what I think are reasonable sort of suggestions there, which basically comply with what you want. The sticking point is this proposal that everybody becomes part of the racing, which isn't going to happen. So I'd like the three of you to acknowledge that is not going to happen in that form. Why have you not looked? You keep citing the government. All three of you have cited the government. We're very unclear about whether it's the federal or the state. In fact, you guys are very unclear about the state. You've got rules you want to bring in with states with differing rules. See, there's disparity there straight up. Why have you not sat with the TBA and suggested ministerial oversight or a ministerial appointment to their board to get what you want? Don't pull faces, Peter. You know it can be done. It's done in triple Cs all the time. It's a quite rational and reasonable way forward that no one has considered, which makes it look like it's a power grab from you guys, and that's why it's being received so poorly. I shake your head, John, but that's exactly how it's being received. Why haven't you considered ministerial oversight of the TBA and direct them and help them with a way forward, which they fundamentally have coalesced on nearly everything in here? All you need then is the ministerial oversight. Has that been considered or not?
Not as such. The only ministerial oversight would be some legislative changes that would make it clear that we're responsible once and for all for the breeding industry. That would be the response.
You don't have to be responsible for the breeders. You have control of the stud book. You would have a ministerial appointment to the TBA or a board above them that would liaise. They would still have their autonomy. You have breeders who are not going to sign this, John, you have to look at alternatives. You should have already looked at the alternatives. You only have to look at the reaction in this room this morning and the way that your people up the front have dealt with the breeders and the response back. And that's a lot of the reason that this isn't working. So you have to look at alternatives. And you have to accept that this isn't going to happen in its current form.
Thanks, Ryan.
I just wanted to clarify something regarding the veterinary surgeons, because it was made mention of. As a group, the veterinary surgeons did not want licensing. As a large group, if everyone was included right throughout New South Wales, there was a very strong movement against it. Now, whilst we remained strong as a group, we were fine. Now, the group became fragmented, and it's not public, but for some reason, Randwick Equine Centre changed their tune. They became very quiet. They didn't make it very public. They weren't attending meetings, and there was a very strong movement still from the remainder of the veterinarians not to get licensing. Now, once that became quiet, and then they sort of made it that the Sydney Metropolitan veterinarians were going to be licensed independent of the rest of the state, and the provincial and the country veterinarians, Randwick Equine Centre had stronger than 50% of the veterinarians represented in the area. So once they decided to get licensing, it was imperative that the rest of the, well, not imperative, but it became very difficult for the remainder of the vets not to fall into line. So I just wanted to clear that up. It is something that if the group becomes fragmented, well, then you're in trouble.
The point I was trying to make was that we did bring in licensing of vets, and the world hasn't fallen in.
I understand that.
The sky has not fallen in. Nothing has changed for you.
Yeah, I know, but it was very untidy, and we certainly are very aware of what has happened. And it was a group, that as a group we didn't want it, and if we'd stayed strong we wouldn't have had it.
Can I just give you the facts on that one? First off, the vets took Racing New South Wales to the Supreme Court, saying that we didn't have the jurisdiction, and they lost. We did have the jurisdiction. Then came the Cobalt case, where vets were implicated. That's when the whole thing changed. I think it's unfair to be blaming the Randwick Equine Centre, because they had nothing to do with it. It was the circumstances of the vets being involved in the Cobalt case, the fact that they lost the Supreme Court case, they really had no option. And there was, as we kept saying to them, if they're doing nothing wrong, they've got nothing to be concerned about. And there hasn't been any problems with vets at all since that situation.
So we've heard a couple of times. That's okay. Peter and I have known each other a long time. Now, we've heard just a couple of times today from both Peters, if you've done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to fear. Now, look, personally, I find that intellectual argument, it's come out of Stalin, it's Russia or somewhere. You see, to follow that, so we got John North's example, where John has been a very respected breeder for a long time. He actually phoned the stewards first to say, this guy's tried extorting money out of me. The stewards would have known he'd been warned off in Queensland. So they took his word. He comes to the sales, he has his horse randomly tested. So clearly there's a communication on between stewards. This guy's still got a cloud hanging over his head. Even though he's received an email saying all clear, they're still searching into him. Now, just to follow that logic through, if you've got nothing to fear, you've got nothing to fear if you've done nothing wrong. If Malcolm Turnbull got up today and Malcolm Turnbull said, do you know what, I'm going to give the police new powers. I've been speaking to Andrew Scipione, speaking to the AFP, police need new powers. We're getting rid of search warrants. We're getting rid of search warrants. No, police can come onto your property, and in fact I'm giving the police a new rule whereby if they don't obey your instruction, that in itself is a punishable offence, which is what the stewards have. It wouldn't just be drug dealers and bank robbers who'd be upset about this. It would be everyone across Australia, because there has to be proper process. So that argument, I think, is just spurious.
I'm not concerned for me about my situation is if that, and because I did have a positive, and that bloke had not got 5 horses, what would have been the outcome for me? You know, I've had 45 years in this industry, a family farm, my business has gone overnight because someone has done something to my horses. and the racing authorities have gone in to take action against me because I'm responsible for those horses.
So you've got to spend $2 million in legal fees defending yourself.
Yeah.
And sorry, that's just one other thing as well. Just mentioning legal fees, just a point that's worth bearing in mind. If you are, so the stewards would have the power to enforce the rules, investigate any breaches of the rules. You would then be called to a stewards' inquiry, which the same stewards who had investigated you would prosecute you. You would stay within, in the New South Wales example, you would stay within the New South Wales sort of judicial process, as it were, for 3 sets of hearings. That's right, Peter, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So let's just go back to John's case again. So this guy has given his horse a shot of steroids. So in this case, he's actually followed through with his threat. You've challenged that and are challenging the evidence on his bad character, and they say, Hamish, we've had a discussion about this once before, about how much, if you wanted a barrister to represent you, to take your case on, to do the preparatory work, and then to sit through all 3 hearings, and then you'd go to the High Court, ballpark, how much would that be?
Cheap. No. Look, it'd be exorbitant. It'd be well in excess of 100, depending upon who you got. I mean, the barristers who appear, I mean, Ray would know better than anyone. The barristers who usually appear at these kind of inquiries are the top level silks, and they don't come for usually anything less than high single figures or over 10 grand a day.
So before you got out of the Racing New South Wales system, the three levels, you'd be spending $150,000 to get to the High Court.
If it went for 3 levels, yeah, probably.
Right.
But I mean, the other thing is that there's a rule in the Australian Rules of Racing. It says you're not entitled to legal representation as of right.
Sorry?
It's at the discretion of the stewards. I'm pretty sure that's correct. Ray can contradict me if he says, but there's no right of legal representation at a steward's inquiry.
So someone like John could go to a steward's inquiry and they say, sorry, you've got to leave your lawyer at the door.
Yeah, and obviously the more serious charges, they do have representation, recent cases in point, but there are other ones which...
Tom, this is unfair to the stewards.
No, it's not.
Well,
no one's calling into... Sorry, Ray, no one's challenging Ray's role.
Mr. North has raised the case. Let's hear from Ray.
Look, John, I'm not up to date. I haven't reviewed the situation, but in your case, as I understand the rules, and Peter will correct me if I'm wrong, if a horse was found on your property to have had a steroid, then it does the mandatory 12 months. It's not like a trainer who's held responsible and then the charge goes to yourself. But I think there's still ongoing litigation with this fellow still in the courts, isn't it? And so, but I still think he's embarking on probably some ambitious action. But I guess there's a lesson too there, Peter, that employing people with that type of reputation mayn't be the doing the sort of due diligence that you should. With the resume that they're getting in the Buckingham Palace. Yeah. Well, I tend to think mostly in life, John, there's 2 sides to every story. I'd be making a phone call, but that's up to yourself. Thanks, Ray.
One commercial point that hasn't been considered and should be considered. A lot of the primary producers in this room, the farmers, probably have commercial loans with their banks. I wonder how their bank manager or the commercial loan manager will consider when he's now operating under the how many pages of the rules have we got? How is the bank manager going to come across and approve that overdraft or approve that commercial loan under the auspices, the constraint that he may face? So I just bring it to you that farmers may have a problem with commercial loans and their banks under these rules.
I'd say the banks, and I've been involved in the investment banking world, the banks would see that as a plus, not a minus, because it constrains people from doing the wrong thing and therefore makes that loan probably more secure than it might be otherwise.
Thanks.
Henry?
This is a question to all of you there. This is ridiculous. And I'll tell you why it's ridiculous, because we're all disagreeing on a situation that we're wasting our time, our money, our energy and our effort. our breeding industry is pro-integrity. Our breeding industry is well, no issue with regulation. Like, we need to protect our industry. We understand that completely. And as Peter Volandi's made a good point, like, why are we fighting against ourselves, right? The point is, none of us breeders in the room agree by the mechanism by which you want to put us under the rules. That is the issue, in my mind. And as we saw with the vets, they took it to the Supreme Court, right? And there was factions which went their separate ways. We've got a room effectively that's unanimous in their view against not using the mechanism of being under the rules of Racing Australia, right? And what I ask is, why are we not considering how to progress our industry? Why are we not considering how to increase transparency, integrity, etc., etc.? Why are we fighting? It's ridiculous. And the point of it is that this is going to go to the Supreme Court. That's the issue I've got. That's the issue I've got. Like, and it's not going to be like the vets. There's a lot of tigers in this room that unanimously are against this. Like, let's get a resolution. Let's progress our industry. Let's work as in the direction of trying to achieve something, as opposed to spending huge amounts of money, causing a massive row in the industry. Like, what benefit is there in trying to progress the perspective of what we're doing at the moment, the way we are doing it? That's my question to John. If can I ask you that question, John?
Well, you're a lot more frightened about this than I am. I'll shortly be out of Racing New South Wales. I'll be back in this room as a breeder. I have absolutely no fear because I know where this is coming from, and it's not any of the things that you fear. And I'm as big as the biggest one here. And I've got as much exposed personally, and I've got loans. So I haven't got the fear that you have. I think this will stiffen up our industry. This will give us a far better perspective in the eyes of government and the public that we are regulated, we follow the rules, and there are disciplines if the rules aren't followed. And at the end of the day, there's a handful of rules, 3 or 4, that apply to the breeding industry and the rules of racing. We just don't want to separate the rules of racing from the rules of breeding so they're in the same book. But at the end of the day, most of the rules of racing apply to racehorses. But John, you've got this fear, like the vets did, and now they realise that it's an unfounded fear. It won't affect anyone in this room that does the right thing because it'll stay dormant. But it's there as a discipline, as a disincentive to misbehave. I don't see just the level of angst there is here, the fear.
But John,
but I'm going to be in your position exactly in a year or two's time, and I'm not worried about it at all.
John, the question is the question is the mechanism by which.
Yeah, I know. Well, the mechanism is that we're talking. We have looked at it every which way. Our preference was to avoid this kind of conflict. That's why we're still here.
Understand.
Right?
Could I just ask somebody?
Now, hang on a minute. I'm just going to finish.
Right.
Henry. And we keep coming back to the only proper mechanism is to encompass this rule under the rules of racing. Keep it neat and tidy and everything else for a lot of reasons. We've been told this is the way to go. Now, if there was another way which would, give us the same result, well then, we'd look at it. If you've got other submissions to make them.
So then we've already suggested, everyone here has to register their stock in the stud book. Okay? So you want transparency as a key issue for you.
I mean, that's no. You should want this, you should initiate this.
So we've already given you a proposal.
We have got a proposal, we have to bring it to you, and you have to argue with it, and then you've agreed.
Hang on. So that all the horses have to be registered in a stud book.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Your claim was we need transparency. We said do it through the stud book. You have a mechanism through the stud book.
No, we haven't.
You can also whatever rule you want to do, you can do through the stud book. And the punishment, you talk about punishment, the punishment is you will not be allowed to enter your horses into the stud book. Now for a breeder, that is a huge, huge disincentive. And the other thing is, just back on the rules of racing, yes, at the moment, there is one rule in here, but it's a catch-all, because it gives you the power to introduce any rule thereafter. So that's why people...
But do you think
That's why people
Tom, do you think Racing Australia wants to destroy the breeding industry? We're dependent on the breeding industry for racing, and racing's dependent on,
Can't the TBA go on to the board of racing?
What's that?
Can't one person from the TBA go on to the board of racing and be...
Well, it's not done that way. It's done by independent selection. Any of you can apply when there's a vacancy.
But John, you've already said, when you sit on the board of Racing New South Wales and Racing...
I take my hat
you take the breeder's hat off. So there is no one there to represent the breeding
industry. No, there will be in an independent system like we have, because the government found that when they had a representative body, that is, all those guys cared about is their own little selfish things, because they had to go back and answer to their TBA or to the Owners Association. And we found the only way for the industry to progress was to have an independent body and select people that are willing to set aside their vested interests and try and see how the whole industry, which includes breeding, can go forward. Because we know we are dependent on breeding for racing, but breeding is dependent on racing for themselves as well. We're very intertwined. There's no harm meant here. This is why I can't understand the reaction. There's no harm meant. I haven't got a scintilla of fear about any of this. I wanted to come in because I want to show off that the breeding industry is disciplined, it's got regulations, it's subject to the rules of racing, and you can bank on us. That's what I want to be able to say, which I couldn't say.
Can I just... Thanks, John. Peter?
Basically from yesterday, just with John making those points, when everyone came in yesterday, the major part of the crowd was shocked with what's going on. So there's obviously been a very poor connection with the breeding industry. There's been very little talk going on, and a lot of the talk that we've been involved in, the points we met 3 years ago, the points we put up, that group basically knocked them all back and didn't agree with any of them, yet they still came up. We've been told all the way along the line, you can talk as much as you like, we'll do what we like anyway. So the consultation with the breeding industry, and you see the people in here that are so passionate, I'm sure I've got a lot of points back from today that are quite valuable. I think that's a major drama. There's been no consultation with industry. And when we get on to this point where we are a national industry or an international industry, our stud book is controlled by the national stud book. So we don't want anyone really interfering with that. So you bring up a point. If you, as the Australian racing body, bring in a rule that affects us dramatically, what right have we got? What right have we got? I was asked to go on that farcical advisory group for the stud book. We asked, what point of veto do we have? There's no point of veto. This group have no point of veto. Obviously there's been very little consultation with this, otherwise people wouldn't be as confused and disappointed with what they are. You have got enough on your plate. Racing's in all sorts of trouble. You've got a lot to do, and you've got very specific people here that you've got standing here around you that deal with this part of the industry. The issues that are dealing with breeding are very different. And we just want to say that the people in here that have got so much vested in should have a better say, and the way it's structured now is not a way that this breed industry has a go.
Peter, no one has a better say than you have, because I'm also an owner, I also have a training centre, but the hat goes off, but I know enough about all of our problems to make a useful contribution.
Sorry John, I don't care whether you're a commercial banker or breeder. The position you have as chairman of the board, you've got to be completely impartial. It doesn't matter whether you're a bricklayer. Whilst you sit there and you administer, and David Moody is a breeder, yes, he's a racing person, I would put him as a breeder, but the rest of them, when you look at their CVs, they're all racing administrators, and they should be if they're going to go and run racing, because you are all professional racing administrators and you do a good job. And you've got a lot on your plate and you've got a lot of things to deal with. So, yeah, I don't think we have any representation whatsoever, and that's my point. If something come up, you change a rule that's going to dramatically change it, we have no right, we have no power of veto. Except for a room like this that yells at you.
Peter, you have no power of veto because when a government appoints you, they can't give somebody else a power of veto over you. It's just impossible. You know, we're elected by the government in effect. But you can have the power of consultation. And when the stud book moved over, excuse me, Anthony, when the stud book moved over, we said we would like to have 3 eminent people from the breeding industry nationally to form a consultative body to deal with any new rules that might come through the stud book that will affect breeders in effect, rules that might affect breeders. And that was put out in good faith. Now, consultation doesn't mean that we automatically agree with what you say, but it doesn't mean that we don't listen to what you say either.
But you've got to listen. You can't listen
You can't listen if we don't say anything. We had a meeting in March. It was just an introduction, and everyone was a bit confused, weren't they, Basil? Like, you know, we spoke to Jacqueline, and she said, "Well, I don't know." She said they've closed our office here.
March last year, Peter.
Yeah, and put us in a you know, moved us over there and knocked off half of the staff. I don't know what's going on. So we've constantly said that we're meeting again. There's been no. So that's not consultation. You've just put 3 industry people in place and said, "Oh, we're consulting industry."
No, that's not the intention at all. The intention,
John, can I answer that, please? Peter McGoran is on record as saying that it doesn't matter what you say, we're not going to listen to you anyhow. Now, that's true. What do you mean? Well, you've said it. I can't produce it to everybody. All and sundry. All and sundry.
No.
Well, can I just... Look, everybody wants to go and sell their horses, and I'm very mindful of the time.
We've got a thing called the championships we've got to organise for tomorrow, but don't worry about it.
No, well, you're doing a very good job at that, John. That's racing. Can I have a vote?
Can we cancel it then?
Can I ask people that are in favour of the stance that TBA has taken with regards to coming under the rules of racing to move to the right, please? On my right. Move over that way.
No, show it.
Well, can everybody? Well, I think you should move. But anyhow, would everybody like to put up their hand and say whether we agree to come under the rules of racing? The question is, do we agree to come under the rules of racing? If you disagree, keep your hand down. If you agree, put your hand up. I think that's unanimous.
Well, the other place to say at the same time, because we have hundreds of international guests out there running around. We've all got our bloody horses here and great difficulty and suffering. Now, it is difficult to do this gig that's on here. So perhaps take a moratorium on this, take a deep breath, give yourself whatever the time you think you need, another 3 months. You can't do it now and this week with the championship on, the sales on. You're just giving bad publicity to the industry, in my view. That's going to
agree with that.
Thanks, John. Thank you all very much for coming, and have a successful sale.
You said that. You said that. You've always said that. Guaranteed. Yes, you have. But I'll tell you what I'm probably ultimately when we make up a decision, where you are, no, exactly.